Hi, welcome back to the Busy Corner. Today I'm going to explain the pattern for the herringbone cowl knit in the round and give you some examples. And the reason I have so many examples is because I never got this to turn out as a long cowl. This pattern was from Pearl Soho. It's called Big Herringbone Cowl. They have a very good pictorial tutorial if you want to do knitting needles. Just remember, on knitting needles, the right side of the garment, the cowl, will be facing you, and when we do it on the hoop, the wrong side will be. So first of all, they did theirs with 3 skeins of Blue Sky alpaca on US 17 needles. It's 100% alpaca yarn, and maybe that's why theirs turned out. Theirs is flat in the picture, and they did block it. I never got mine to look like that. Mine all came out, and this is a good example, like this. The edges, now I didn't weave my ends in because I'm going to take this out, but I wanted to show you this. The edges curl in badly. Now, if you block a garment, that will often flatten it out. However, blocking is only temporary, and I'm not a blocker. I feel towards blocking like I feel towards ironing and dry cleaning. If I have to fuss with a garment, it doesn't stay in the house. So, every single scarf I made long, and this is a fairly long scarf, and I gave up. On the hoop, by the way, you won't know it's curled like this. It'll look perfectly flat, and when you've bound off your last stitch and removed it, then you'll see as soon as it stretches out. So I think it has something to do with the weight of the yarn and how it stretches when it is released from the knitting hoop. But I could see that as I got about 12 inches out that it was a little bit of curled on the edge, and I thought this was a pain anyway because I'd use a crochet hook on the knit 2 together through the back loop because the hole was so small. And here's another example. Again, the edge is curled in so much, and I even started and ended on a smaller hoop with this. Well, it's a cap, and I'll show you that in a moment. And I learned too along the way that what I needed was a bigger rod. If you remember back to when we did the herringbone cowl on the straight knitting needles, one of the reasons I turned it into a Mobius was because of the edge curl, because I didn't like the way it hung. Now, this was done on a US 17 straight knitting needle in lesson 33. I went back to that and I tried it on the straight knitting needles, and you can see how my ridges are going side to side. And I used a bigger knitting rod. I used the one equivalent to a US 35, which is basically your Schedule 40 pipe, your half-inch Schedule 40 pipe. And it's too loose, and it still doesn't hang correctly. And that's what I didn't like about it in the first place, and why I made it into a Mobius. It kind of wants to roll over into kind of a roll collar, and I didn't like that. So I think that knitting it in the round makes a far better looking garment. But it's a trick to find the right yarn, I thought. So all the cowls turned out. Now I use different sizes of pipe. You do not want to use more than 1 strand for this pattern. It was very difficult to do with 2 strands, and I tried. The finest yarn I worked with turned out to be, they call this a 5 bulky. It's a 3-ply bamboo and silk yarn from Knit Picks. It is a beautiful yarn. It is so soft and beautiful. But the ply does separate, but I would not call this a 5. I would call it a heavy 4. And it's a 3-ply. And you can see, and I'm going to show you this in the next video, I'm knitting this on the size equivalent to a US 15, and I have a little cap over here, it's hard to see, that raises it up 1 size to US 17. If you can see this kind of milky, you'll see it in the next video, that little milky adapter. And that allowed me to start the pattern on a small size, then knit the body, a bigger size, and then the last 2 rows, which is where we'll start in the next video, I'll take that cap off. But if you have any kind of wrist issues or finger issues, you may want a crochet hook if you're going to do a yarn this fine. So finding the right yarn was tricky. This is the first time actually I bought yarn online because I was looking for something that had a better drape and that was a natural fiber. Now, this top one was made with Bernat roving, and it has some acrylic in it. I began it and ended it on the hoop, 16-inch hoop, that's equivalent to a US 15. And then I used this little piece of tubing, and I just jammed a piece of wood that is basically part of a dowel rod in the end, so it would stay on the hoop, and went up to a US 19. That wasn't too bad. When it's just your beginning, your cast on row, and then your last 2 rows you knit on the small one. And it's a little bit of work, and you'll see that in the next video. And for this one, I used 65 stitches. And you can knit till it was about 10 inches deep. Now, remember that when you put this on, after you've knitted and put it on and off, taken it on and off your head a couple of times, it's going to want to stretch out this way. So don't worry too much. You ideally want these about 24 inches around, but they're going to stretch a bit. And you can barely see where the round changes. It's right through here, this section. And that's where you change, because each round is, you change every other round. But it has a look, something like this. So it's a little bit drapier. If you want something that's a stiffer look, this Malabrigo is just fabulous yarn. It's so soft. It's merino wool, which is one of the softest wools. It's the one they recommend for garments worn around the neck. Even people who are allergic to wool can usually use merino because it has such a low micron size. It's like knitting with a cotton ball. And if you are going to use a roving like this, be sure you look at my previous video. I think it's lesson 36 I just did yesterday. Shows you gives you some tips on knitting with roving. But this will give you a much stiffer, upright look. If you want a cowl that stands up a bit more and covers the bottom of your ears and your nose when you're outside, and it's so soft. And I wasn't sure I would like this variegation, but I love the colors. And it reminds me of that corn in the fall, that you put out for a decoration. It's so beautiful. And it's so soft. And this, I used a cable cast on because unlike most wools, this did not feel like it had any elasticity. And it's only a 90-yard skein, and I only had about 10 inches left. This is all I had left out of my skein, just a few little nibs here. And some of that was what was tied, the skein was tied with. This isn't cheap, it's $22 a skein. But if you only need one, well, that's a beautiful gift, or, I guess if you wanted to resell it, but anyway, it's much more affordable. And I think frankly, I think this pattern looks nicer as a cowl. As a long scarf that you have to double and arrange, your herringbone isn't always going to show, and it's going to be quite heavy if the original pattern called for 3 skeins. It would cost $75 to make. So anyway, I love that yarn. But do a cable cast on because it's not very stretchy. The other ones I used a regular long tail cast on, but because this skein was so short, only 90 yards, I didn't want to waste any. And I did a cable cast on because I knew it wouldn't be very elastic. And again, I started on this one. I started on a size equivalent to a US 17, and then I put a little cap on that was just a chunk of polyethylene tubing that makes it exactly the same size as a US 35 needle. You can use also your little chunk of Schedule 40 pipe, but it's slightly bigger. It's 7 millimeters larger in circumference than polyethylene tubing, just so you know that. And that's what I used on the end for the body of the scarf. In the last 2 rows I took the cap off. You can make your cap out of anything. It could be cardboard. Be nice if it's reusable. So before you begin your scarf, just wrap some cardboard around, and you could measure the circumference as you go along to get the right amount of cardboard on there. And then if you want it to be slippery, just wrap some Teflon tape around the outside. Anyway, and this was made out of Woolies yarn. So I put 54 stitches on. I didn't do as good a job on my seam up there, I see. But I'm keeping it for myself, so I didn't care. So I put 54 on because I didn't want it hugging up on my neck as much. And again, as you wear these, they're going to stretch out a bit. But I think it's a great look. And you could make it wider if you wanted, but don't do that with this because it looks stupid. You want this to fit up close because of its stiffness and, you know, the body of the yarn itself. I mean, I could stand it up. It reminds me of a basket, really. And the one with the most drape is Heartland. This is a line brand. I guess it's called a Heartland Thick and Quick in the color Joshua Tree, which is why I picked it. And because I couldn't get this pattern to turn out, I kept trying and trying and trying and trying and trying. I thought, as I went to the store, this had the most drape, and it does. And so, you know, if you want something that's going to really fit loosely and kind of settle down and not have a stiff look to it, you know, pick a softer yarn, which is why I got that bamboo and silk. And it's beautiful, but it's not as beefy as I had hoped. You want at least a number 5, and it should be a good 5. This is a 5, which is why I use slightly smaller knitting hoop and why I put on more stitches, 65 stitches. So a 5 or a 6 will do nicely. But all this made me buy yarn for the first time online and go to a fiber store locally and buy the Malabrigo yarn. And I went to a fiber fair and bought a drop spindle and bought some roving, and I'm building a spinning wheel because I've decided that if I'm going to keep doing this, I should just make the yarn that I want. So that's it for this video. To make these scarves, you will need your tubing, 16 inches long, in a size equivalent to a US 15, a 17, and then caps. And they can be plastic. If they fit tight, like a vinyl cap, and you'll see that in the next video, you won't even need to, in fact, what I did with these, when you go to put it on, you're going to want to put on, depending on the size of the cap, I would use a rubber band on the top, unless it fits snugly like a cardboard wrap. But get creative. I'm sure you got something at home that's not going to cost you any money. So put your rubber band around there. That works better than this. You want it to fit firmly. And you're going to slip it on there after you've done your cast on row. If it doesn't seem to want to go on, you know, choose a slightly smaller rubber band or space it out on there. Of course, it's not going to go on. Something like that. That way, it doesn't pull off on its own when you pick it up out of your knitting bin. You don't have that trouble on the long ones, but these short ones, it's easy to make a mistake and pick it up on the wrong end. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.